A true story. A lonely widower cowboy prayed for a second chance. Then she arrived with 2 daughters and a hidden truth. Sked. There is a particular kind of silence that lives on a ranch when it is just one man rattling around in it. It is not the peaceful kind. It is not the kind you get after a long day when you finally sit down and let your bones rest. No, this is a heavier silence. The kind that wraps around your shoulders like a wet blanket. The kind that reminds you, every single morning, that the chair across the breakfast table is empty, that the coffee cup on the second hook never gets used, that the boots by the back door are yours and yours alone. Dale was 57 years old. He had calloused hands, a slow way of walking, and a face that had been tanned and creased by decades of Texas sun. He had run the same cattle ranch his father had built, on 400 acres of flat land outside a small town in Blanco County, for most of his adult life. He knew every fence post on the property by heart. He knew the sound each gate made when the wind hit it at night. He knew the way the sky looked right before a storm rolled in from the west, and he knew exactly how long it took the pasture grass to dry after rain. What he did not know anymore was how to fill the hours between supper and sleep. His wife, Carol Ann, had died 3 years before this story begins. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 8 months from diagnosis to burial, which people in town kept telling Dale was a mercy, because at least she did not suffer long. Dale would nod when they said that, because they meant well and he understood that, but he never quite agreed with it either. 8 months had not felt like a mercy to him. It had felt like a door slamming shut while he was still standing in the hallway trying to find his way in. They had been married for 22 years. They had tried for children and it had not happened. They had made peace with that. What they had built instead was a life so full of small, ordinary happiness that Dale had never once stopped to count his blessings because he had not known you had to. You did not count blessings when they were everywhere around you. You only started counting when they were gone. So now he counted. Every morning, the empty hook, the quiet kitchen, the way no one called his name from the other room. He still worked the ranch. The cattle needed tending, the fences needed fixing, the hay needed hauling, and so he did all of it. He got up before sunrise and he did not stop until it was dark. Work was the only thing that did not require him to think too hard. He was grateful for it. On Sundays he went to church. He sat in the second pew on the left side, same as he had for 30 years. He listened to the pastor, a quiet, steady man named Roy, who had been Dale's friend since they were both young men, and he tried to take in the words rather than just sit there. Some Sundays he managed it. Some Sundays he did not. His sister Patsy drove out once a month from San Marcos to check on him. She would bring food he did not need and ask questions he was not sure how to answer. She had 2 grown kids and a husband who was decent and boring in all the right ways, and she worried about Dale the way you worry about a plant you forgot to water. Every time she left, she hugged him for a second too long and said she was just a phone call away. He always told her he knew that. He almost never called. He had a neighbor, a rancher named Tom who ran the property to the east, and they talked over the fence sometimes and shared tools when needed. Tom was a good man, solid, but he had his own family, his own land, his own life, and Dale was not the kind of person to walk into someone else's warmth and pretend it was his own. The truth was, Dale had never been a man who needed a lot of company. He had spent his whole life relatively comfortable with quiet and with the deep, self-sustaining rhythm of ranch work. He was not someone who got lonely easily. So when he did get lonely, when the loneliness finally settled in hard and heavy, the way it had over these 3 years, it was worse for being unfamiliar. He had no practice managing it. He did not know what to do with a feeling that had no useful outlet, that work could not fix, and sleep could only temporarily pause. He had tried a few things in the first year after Carol Ann. He had said yes to some social invitations he would normally have declined. He had gone to a church supper or 2. He had sat through one dinner at Patsy and Don's house that was clearly arranged to introduce him to someone. A perfectly decent woman whose name he had forgotten by the drive home. None of it had touched the thing in him that was empty. If anything, it had made it clearer, the way turning on a lamp in a room with something missing makes you see the missing thing more plainly. By the second year he had stopped trying and started just enduring. By the third year he had stopped thinking much about it at all. He had simply organized his days around work and routine and the small reliable pleasures of a life well tended, and he had told himself that was fine, that plenty of people lived this way, that he was not someone who needed more than this. He had almost believed it. So most evenings, Dale sat on the porch. He had a wooden rocking chair out there that had been on that porch since before he could remember. He would sit in it after supper with a glass of sweet tea, or sometimes just nothing at all, and he would watch the light change over the pasture. The sky in that part of Texas does something remarkable at the end of the day. It turns colors that you would not believe if someone tried to describe them to you. Deep oranges, purples that look almost impossible, a kind of red at the very edge of the horizon that looks like the land itself is breathing. Dale had watched that sky his whole life, and he had never once gotten used to it. He used to watch it with Carol Ann. She used to bring her tea out and sit in the chair beside him, and they would not always talk. Sometimes they would just sit there together, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Now he sat alone, and the sky was still beautiful, and that was almost harder. Shah. It was a Tuesday in late September when Dale did something he had not done in a long time. He had gone to church that past Sunday, and Pastor Roy had given a sermon that had been sitting in Dale's chest all week, the way a good sermon sometimes does. Roy had talked about the difference between trusting God and hiding from God. He said that sometimes people who had been hurt badly or lost someone they loved would tell themselves they were being patient, that they were waiting on God. But what they were really doing was keeping themselves so busy with pain and loneliness that they had no room left to receive anything. He said that refusing to be open to something new was not faith. It was fear with a different name. Dale had sat in that pew and stared at the back of the seat in front of him and thought, that is not about me. By Tuesday he had admitted to himself that it was probably about him. So that evening, after supper, after he had washed his dish and hung up his towel and done everything exactly the way he always did it, he walked out onto the porch. He did not sit. He stood at the railing with his hands wrapped around the wood, and he looked out at the pasture. The sky was already going dark, just the last bit of orange left above the tree line. And he prayed, out loud, not in a polished way, not in a church voice, just a plain, honest prayer, the kind that sounds more like talking to a person than reciting something. He said, Lord, I am tired of eating alone. I am tired of this quiet that has got no good feeling in it. I am not asking for Carol Ann back because I understand that is not how it works. I am asking if there is something else for me, if there is something good still waiting out there somewhere. And if there is, I would appreciate not being too stubborn to see it when it comes. Then he sat down in his rocking chair and finished the last of the dark, listened to the crickets, and went to bed. He did not expect anything to happen quickly. He was 57 years old. He had learned by now that the things worth having did not usually arrive fast. But 4 days later, something happened. Dale had driven into town to pick up feed and a few other things he needed from the hardware store. It was late afternoon by the time he was heading back, the truck loaded up, the sun already getting low and throwing long shadows across the county road. He was not thinking about anything in particular. He was just driving the way you drive a road you have driven 1,000 times. Then he saw the truck on the shoulder. It was an old white pickup, not in great shape, with the hood propped open and the hazard lights going. For a second, Dale almost kept driving. The road was quiet. It was getting dark, and it was probably just someone who had already called for help and was waiting. He had no reason to stop. He stopped anyway. He pulled up behind the truck and got out. A woman was standing at the front of it, her arms crossed, looking at the engine with the expression of someone who had already tried everything they knew and come up empty. She was not panicking. She looked frustrated, yes, and tired in a way that seemed like it went deeper than just today, but she was not falling apart. That was the first thing Dale noticed about her. The second thing he noticed were the two little girls watching from the back seat. One was older, maybe 9 or 10, sitting up straight with her hands in her lap. The other was younger, maybe 6 or 7, and she had her nose pressed to the window glass, watching Dale approach with the complete and fearless curiosity that only very small children have. The woman looked up when Dale came around. She was maybe 38 or 39, with dark hair pulled back and a careful, watchful face. She did not smile right away, which Dale respected. She took a quick look at him, at his truck, at the feed in the back, and seemed to decide he was probably not a problem. "Belt went," she said. "I heard it snap about 2 miles back and made it this far before the engine started getting hot." Dale leaned over and looked at the engine. She was right. The serpentine belt was gone, which meant the alternator was not charging, which meant she would not get far even if she could cool the engine down. It was not a hard fix, but it was not something you could do on the side of the road without a part. "Where are you headed?" Dale asked. "West," she said, and she left it at that. He looked up at her. She was looking back at him steadily. There was something in her eyes that was hard to describe, a kind of alertness, like someone who had learned to read situations quickly. "You got family nearby? Anyone who can come out?" "No," she said, short and flat. Not rude, just honest. Dale straightened up. He looked at the truck, at the 2 girls still watching from the back seat. The younger one had now opened her window 2 inches and was watching him with enormous dark eyes. "The part's gonna have to be ordered," Dale said. "Might be a day, might be 2. You're not going to find an auto shop open out here tonight." He paused. "My name's Dale. I've got a ranch about 2 miles back up this road. 4 empty bedrooms and a pot of chili on the stove. You're welcome to stay tonight, and we'll sort the truck out in the morning." The woman looked at him. Dale had seen people weigh decisions before. He had seen it in horses, when a new situation required them to decide between fear and trust. This woman was doing exactly that. She was looking at him the way you look at something when you are trying to decide if it is safe. "I don't want to impose," she said finally. "You're not imposing on a single thing," Dale said. "There's nothing out here to impose on except cows and grass." The younger girl in the back seat spoke up at this, loudly and without warning. "Do you have real cows?" Dale looked at her. "About 200 of them." "Rosie," the woman said, half turning. But the little girl just leaned further out the window. "What are their names?" Despite himself, Dale almost smiled. "They don't all have names." "They should," Rosie said, completely serious. The woman looked back at Dale. Something in her face had shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "My name is Lena," she said, "and I suppose we'll take you up on that." The ranch house was not fancy, but it was solid and warm, and everything in it had been cared for. Lena stood in the kitchen doorway while Dale got the chili going again on the stove, and she looked around the way people do when they are reading a place like a story. There were old photographs on the wall, a shelf of worn paperbacks, a row of hooks by the back door with 1 pair of boots and 4 empty spots. There was a framed needlework piece above the window that said something about home and grace, a little faded from years of light. Dale caught her looking at it. "My wife made that," he said simply. Lena nodded. She did not ask any questions about it, which he was glad for. Rosie, the younger girl, had already made herself completely at home. Within 10 minutes of arriving, she had identified every animal visible from the porch, asked Dale 4 questions about horses, and requested to know if the ranch had a dog. When Dale said no, she had looked at him with genuine concern and said, "You really ought to get one." Then she had gone back to looking at the horses in the paddock, as if she owned the place. The older girl, whose name was Nadia, was different. She sat at the kitchen table with a quiet watchfulness that was striking in a 10-year-old. She was polite, careful with her words, and kept glancing at her mother the way children do when they have learned to read the room before they allow themselves to relax in it. She reminded Dale a little of a young cat, the kind that takes its time deciding whether a place is safe. They ate supper at the big kitchen table, all 4 of them. Dale had cornbread to go with the chili, and Rosie ate 3 pieces of it and announced it was the best thing she had ever had in her life, which Dale suspected might not be entirely true, but appreciated all the same. Lena ate quietly and steadily, the way people eat when they have been hungrier than they let on. Dale noticed this but said nothing. After supper, Dale showed them to 2 of the bedrooms. Clean sheets, clean towels. He said goodnight and closed his own bedroom door and lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house, which were different now, Small, different sounds, someone moving in the hallway, a soft conversation between mother and daughters through a wall, the particular kind of quiet that comes from a house that has people in it again. He fell asleep faster than he had in a long time. In the morning, Dale was up before 5, the same as always. He was halfway through his first cup of coffee when Nadia appeared in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed, hair combed. "Can I help with anything?" she asked. Dale looked at her. "You ever fed horses before?" "No." "Want to learn?" She thought about this for exactly 1 second. Yes. So she went with him to the barn, while Lena and Rosie were still sleeping, and Dale showed her how to measure out the morning feed and how to stand at the paddock fence so the horses came to you instead of you going to them. The horses were gentle ranch horses, not showpieces, and they came over with their big quiet eyes and their warm breath rising in the cool morning air. Nadia held out her hand with the feed pellets the way Dale had shown her. The old bay horse, Copper, stretched his neck and took it from her palm, soft as anything. She did not say a word, but something in her face changed. Dale looked away quickly, because some moments are better given privacy. The truck part had to be ordered. The auto shop in town said it would be 2 days, maybe 3. Lena thanked Dale and said she and the girls would find somewhere to stay in town while they waited. Dale told her that was unnecessary. She said she did not want to be in the way. He told her there was no way to be in the way on a working ranch. There was always something that needed doing, and besides, Rosie had already announced her intention to name all 200 cattle before she left, and that was going to take a while. Lena had looked at him for a moment. There was something cautious still in her face, a habit of caution that seemed to run deep, but she had also looked at her daughters, at Nadia, out in the paddock brushing Copper's nose with gentle fingers, at Rosie chasing a barn cat across the yard with uncontainable joy. "All right," she said quietly, 2 more days. Those 2 days became 3, and 3 became a week, and by the end of that week, something had shifted so quietly that none of them had quite noticed it happening. Lena helped in the kitchen without being asked. She was a good cook, practical and unfussy, and she figured out where everything was in Dale's kitchen with the efficiency of someone who was used to making do. She made things with what was on hand, nothing complicated, just good. One evening she made tamales from scratch with what she found in the pantry, and Rosie sat on the counter the whole time helping and getting corn dough everywhere, and Dale stood in the doorway of his own kitchen watching this and feeling something he could not quite name. He and Lena talked in the evenings. After the girls were settled and the dishes were done, they would sit on the porch, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing, and they would talk the way people talk when they are trying to know each other without pushing too hard. He told her about the ranch, about his father and grandfather, about how the land had been in the family since before he was born. He told her a little about Carol Ann, carefully, the way you tell someone about something precious, measuring your words. He talked about the years they had been together, and the things that had been good about them, which were many. Lena listened. She was a good listener, the kind who actually heard what you said, rather than just waiting for her turn to speak. She would ask a question now and then, a quiet question that told him she had been paying attention. She talked less about herself. He noticed this. She spoke about her daughters easily and with obvious love. She would light up when she talked about something funny Rosie had done or something Nadia had figured out on her own. But when conversation turned toward her own history, her own life, she answered in short, careful sentences and then gently moved the subject somewhere else. Dale did not push. He was not by nature a pushy man, and besides, he understood that people came to trust in their own time. He had no reason to demand anything from her. She was a guest on his property and he was glad she was there, and that was enough for now. What he did notice, though he said nothing about it, was that she checked the front door lock twice every night before going to bed. He noticed that when a truck slowed down out on the road, her whole body went still. He noticed that she never said her last name if she could help it, and that when she made a phone call she went out to the far end of the yard where she could not easily be heard. These things told him a story he was not yet in a position to ask about, so he simply kept doing what he was doing. He kept the porch light on. He kept the house warm. He fixed Rosie a set of little reins out of spare rope so she could pretend to ride the fence posts, which she did with enormous enthusiasm. He taught Nadia how to check a fence line for weak spots, and she paid attention with the seriousness of someone who understood that useful knowledge was worth having. One afternoon he found Nadia sitting alone on the top rail of the paddock fence, watching Copper graze below her. She did not look sad exactly, but she looked like she was thinking hard about something. Dale leaned on the fence beside her. "What's on your mind?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Were you really lonely before we got here?" Dale looked out at the pasture. "Yeah," he said, "I really was." Nadia considered this. "So were we," she said, "even when there were people around. You can be lonely even when you're not alone." Dale looked at her. She was 10 years old. He thought that was one of the wisest things anyone had said to him in a long time. "That's true," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching the horse. Chip! When the truck was finally fixed and ready at the end of the week, Lena came to Dale in the evening and told him. She said she and the girls would leave in the morning. She said it in a matter-of-fact way, the way you say something when you have already decided it and you are just telling someone rather than discussing it. They were on the porch. It was that time of evening again, the sky doing what it did, going through its colors. The air smelled like dry grass and something faintly of rain that had fallen 2 counties over and was drifting their way. Dale nodded when she told him. He did not say anything right away. He sat in his chair and looked at the pasture. Then he said, "You don't have to go in the morning if you're not ready." Lena looked at him. "I mean that plainly," he said, "not as anything else. Just that you don't have to go if you're not ready to go." She was quiet for a long moment. Out in the yard, a cricket started up somewhere near the water trough. "I don't know where I'm going yet," she said finally. It came out like something she had been holding tightly and just now let go of. "Then stay until you do," Dale said. "There's nothing here that requires you to be in a hurry." She looked at him again. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the pasture, same as he always did. But she studied his face in the side light the way you study something you are trying to understand. "Why are you being this kind to us?" she asked. Dale thought about it genuinely before he answered. "Because I was sitting on this porch alone not so long ago," he said, "and I asked God for something. And then your truck broke down on my road, and I don't think that's nothing." Lena did not say anything to that, but she did not argue with it either. She stayed. The weeks that followed had a particular texture to them. They were not dramatic. Nothing grand happened. What happened was the accumulation of ordinary days, and it was the ordinariness of it that made it something. Dale had not counted on how much the ranch would change with children in it. He had never had children of his own, and he had stopped expecting to, and he had made a kind of peace with what that meant for the future of the property. He had assumed, without much feeling about it, that the land would eventually go to Patsy's kids or be sold to a neighbor. He had not thought past that. Now there were boots by the back door, small ones. Rosie's were bright red, which she had chosen herself at the general store in town and which were already covered in mud within the first week. Nadia's were practical brown, the same kind Dale wore, and she had asked for those specific ones after watching him work in the mornings. Every day Dale looked at those boots lined up beside his own and felt something shift in his chest that he did not yet have a name for. Rosie was a force of nature in the way that only certain children are. She was not loud for the sake of it, not demanding in the difficult way, but she had an absolute confidence in her right to be interested in everything that made the world around her seem larger, just by her being in it. She wanted to know how the windmill worked. She wanted to know why some cows were one color and some were spotted. She wanted to know if horses dreamed, and if so, what Dale thought they dreamed about. She asked questions faster than he could answer them, which he suspected might be intentional on her part. Nadia was the opposite of her sister in almost every way and yet somehow made perfect sense beside her. Where Rosie expanded outward, Nadia considered inward. She was the kind of child who would watch something happen 3 or 4 times before she asked a question about it, and when she finally asked, the question was always the precise one, the one that cut straight to the middle of the thing. Dale had known grown ranch hands for 30 years who did not ask questions as cleanly as Nadia did. One afternoon in November, he was replacing a wooden post on the east fence line, and Nadia had come along without asking, which was how she usually joined things. She carried the tools he handed her without being told to. She watched him set the post in the ground and tamp the dirt and test the wire, and she did not speak for a long stretch. Then she said, "Why do you do it yourself? Couldn't you hire someone?" "I could," Dale said, "but if I do it myself, I know exactly how it's done. And I know the fence." Nadia thought about that. "You like knowing things firsthand," she said. "I trust things I've checked with my own hands," he said. "It's not that I don't trust other people. It's just that your own hands are accountable in a way someone else's aren't." She turned that over for a moment, which was what she did with everything worth keeping. "My mom is like that," she said quietly. "She checks everything twice. She always has." Dale nodded. He did not say anything further, but he filed it away. There were other moments. The evening Rosie taught Dale a hand-clapping game she had learned at school, and he played it with her for a good 20 minutes, his big rough hands getting the pattern wrong every time, Rosie correcting him with endless patience and enormous laughter. The morning Nadia left a handwritten page of notes on the kitchen table about how to read cloud formations to predict weather, which she had found in a library book and copied out in her careful handwriting. Small things, one after another, like stones placed across a stream. Lena watched all of it. She watched her daughters settle into this place, and this man, and she watched carefully, not with mistrust, but the way you watch something you love when you are still not entirely sure it is real. She had been wrong before about what was safe and good. She was learning to trust her own reading of a situation again, which was slower and more careful work than learning to trust Dale, who had given her very little reason not to. She had begun talking more freely some evenings, about her years as a nurse, which she had loved and which had been taken from her gradually, the way a lot of things had been taken, so slowly she had not always seen it happening. About a sister she was slowly getting back in touch with. Small memories from her own childhood that had been buried under the weight of recent years and were coming back now with the surprise of things found in an old coat pocket. She laughed more easily than she had in the beginning. She disagreed with Dale about things and said so directly, without first softening every opinion into a question, without the careful pre-apology she had arrived with. Dale liked that most of all. Not the contentment of it, though that was good, the realness of it, the fullness of a person who was taking up space again the way they were meant to. Rosie named 41 of the 200 cattle before she ran out of names she liked. She kept a list in a little notebook Dale had found in a kitchen drawer and given to her, and she updated it with great seriousness whenever she thought of a new one. Her system of naming was completely random and deeply personal. There was a large brown steer she named Biscuit, a white-faced heifer she named Cloud, a small nervous calf she named Sir Wiggles, and so on. Dale went along with all of it without complaint. Nadia was more methodical. She had started helping Dale with actual ranch tasks, small ones at first, then more involved. She learned how to read the sky for weather, how to test wire tension on a fence, how to tell if a water trough was starting to go green. She did these things with the focus of someone storing up knowledge they intended to use. She asked questions that were practical and specific, never silly, and Dale answered them all with the same seriousness she brought to them. Lena watched her daughter learn these things, and something in her face was complicated every time she did, a mix of pride and something else, something that looked like grief almost, like watching someone reach for a thing she had once been afraid to let them have. Dale and Lena's conversations on the porch had become a kind of anchor to their days. They talked about all sorts of things, the history of the land, what it had been like growing up in different parts of Texas, books they had both read, things they had both believed and then revised. They disagreed sometimes, good-naturedly, on things that did not much matter and a few things that did. He liked that she had opinions and was not afraid to say them. She liked that he listened without waiting to argue back. The town noticed. Small towns always do. People at the feed store said things. The women at church were curious. Patsy, Dale's sister, had heard about the woman and the two girls on her brother's ranch and called him on a Sunday evening with a voice that had effort in it. "Who is she?" Patsy asked. "Her name's Lena. She had truck trouble. Her and her girls stayed on a while. And now? And now they're still here." There was a pause. "Dale, you don't know this woman." "I know her pretty well." "You know what she's shown you. That's not the same thing." Dale was quiet on the phone for a moment. He could not argue with that. "You're right," he said, "but I'm not worried." Patsy made a sound that was not quite a sigh. "I just don't want to see you get hurt, Dale." "I know," he said. "I love you too. I'll talk to you Sunday." He was not angry with his sister. He understood her. But he also knew something she could not see from a phone call in San Marcos, which was that whatever this was, it did not feel dangerous. It felt, for the first time in 3 years, like something real. Then came the phone call. It was a Wednesday afternoon, about 6 weeks after Lena and the girls had arrived. Dale was out fixing a section of fence on the south pasture when he saw her, far across the yard, pacing near the old cedar tree, her phone to her ear. He was too far to hear anything, but he could see her posture. Her back was straight and tight. Her free hand was pressed flat against her stomach, the way people press their hand against something that hurts. Her head was down. When she came back in, she had her face arranged carefully. She made dinner. She was pleasant at the table. She helped Rosie with a drawing project and checked Nadia's reading before bed. She was present and capable, and Dale could tell by the angle of her jaw that she was holding something with both hands. He waited until the girls were asleep. They were on the porch again, the night air cool now in late October. Dale set down his coffee cup on the rail and looked at her. "You want to tell me what happened today?" he asked. Not demanding, just asking. Lena looked at her hands. She turned her coffee cup slowly. "A friend called me. Someone who knew me before." She paused. "She said my husband had found the name of the town." Dale was very still. "Your husband," he said. She looked up at him then, and the thing in her eyes was not fear exactly. It was the look of someone who has been carrying something heavy for so long that showing it to another person feels like the most dangerous thing they have ever done. "I left him," she said, "about 4 months ago. I took the girls and I left, and I didn't tell anyone where I was going." She paused. "I'm not divorced. I couldn't do it fast enough. I just had to get out first." Dale said nothing. He let the silence sit there without filling it. "He's not a violent man," she said. Then she stopped and seemed to think about that. "Not with his hands, but there are other ways to hurt someone. He controlled everything. The money, the car, who I could talk to, where I could go. He made me feel small in ways I couldn't always explain to other people. And when he started doing it to the girls too, I knew it was time." She stopped there. The night was quiet except for the crickets and somewhere far off a single coyote. "I tried to leave once before," she said quietly. "He talked me out of it. He was very good at talking." Dale picked up his coffee cup, then set it back down. He looked at the dark pasture for a moment. Then he said, "Are you and the girls safe right now, tonight?" "I think so. He knows the town." "Not the address." "Then we'll figure it out from there," Dale said. "One thing at a time." She looked at him. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." "I didn't need you to tell me sooner," he said. "I needed you to tell me when you were ready, and you did." He said it simply, with no drama in it, as if it were just a fact, which to him it was. Lena turned her face away toward the yard. He saw her jaw tighten briefly. She was not crying. She was the kind of person who saved that for later, for private. "Why is it so easy for you?" she asked, quietly, to the dark yard. "It's not easy," Dale said. "I just know what actually matters and what doesn't." He came on a Thursday, in the middle of the afternoon, when the light was flat and bright, and you could see the road for a long way in either direction. Dale was in the barn when he heard the truck come up the drive. He walked out and stood at the barn door and watched it park at the far end of the yard, just past the gate. It was a clean, newer model truck, well kept. The man who got out was around 50, dressed neatly, with the careful posture of someone who understood appearances. He did not come through the gate. He stood at the fence and waited, which Dale knew was deliberate. It was the kind of move that said, "I know what property lines are. I am being respectful." He was managing the situation before it had even started. Dale walked over. "Help you with something?" he said. The man smiled. It was a good smile. Practiced. "I hope so. My name's Victor Castillo. I think my wife and daughters may be staying with you. I just want to talk to Lena, that's all. I believe there's been some kind of misunderstanding." He had a calm, reasonable voice. Everything about him was calibrated to communicate calm reasonableness. Dale had grown up around horses and cattle his whole life, and he had learned a long time ago that the things that were actually dangerous did not always make noise about it. "She's asked not to be contacted," Dale said. "I understand that," Victor said, "but she's my wife. I think if I could just explain, she's made her wishes clear," Dale said. "I'd ask you to respect that." Victor's eyes stayed steady, measuring. "You're not in a position to speak for her. This is my property," Dale said, very evenly. "So on this property, I am." There was a pause. The two men looked at each other across the fence. Victor had the kind of composure that comes from always getting what he wanted eventually. Dale had the kind of composure that came from decades of doing hard things quietly. Neither of them raised their voice. "I'll be in town," Victor said pleasantly. "If she changes her mind, she knows how to reach me." He got back in his truck and drove away. Dale stood at the fence and watched him go until the truck was out of sight. Then he went inside. Lena was standing at the kitchen window. She had seen. "He's gone," Dale said. She nodded. Her face was the careful, flat kind of calm. "I'm going to make 2 phone calls," Dale said. "One to a lawyer I know in town. One to the county sheriff, who is an old friend of mine. Not to get anyone in trouble, just to make sure the right people know the situation." Lena opened her mouth. He thought she was going to tell him he didn't need to. Instead, she said, "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to. There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment, with an expression he could not entirely read. Then she said, very quietly, "No one has ever done that for me before." Dale did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and picked up his phone. That night after the girls went to bed, Nadia came back out to the kitchen. She sat down at the table and looked at her hands. Dale was still at the table with his phone, making notes. Lena was washing the dishes. Nadia said, "We saw him from the window." No one said anything for a moment. "Was it scary?" Rosie's voice came from the hallway. She had not gone to bed either. Lena dried her hands on the dish towel and crossed the kitchen and knelt down in the hallway and held both girls for a long, quiet moment. Dale looked down at his phone and gave them the privacy of the moment. After a while, Nadia said, "From the hallway, without looking into the kitchen, you stood at the fence." Dale looked up. "You didn't let him in," she said. "Just a statement, quiet." "No," Dale said, "I didn't." Nadia nodded once. Then she went to bed. The whole truth came out over the next 2 evenings, not all at once, but in the way truth comes from someone who has learned the hard way that not everyone deserves it. Victor had been pleasant when they first got together. Attentive. He seemed to know exactly what Lena needed to hear, and he said it. They had married when Nadia was 2 years old, and Lena was younger, and still believed that caring a lot about someone was the same as loving them well. It had started small. He didn't like her going to certain friends' houses. He thought she spent too much money. He had opinions about how she dressed, what she cooked, how she spoke in social situations. He always framed these things as concern, as love. He was very good at framing things. Over years, the circle of her life had gotten smaller and smaller without her quite noticing it happening. By the time she understood what had happened, the circle was tiny and she was in the middle of it with no clear sense of where the door was. She had tried to leave once, 3 years before. She had packed a bag. He had come home before she could get out. He had not shouted. He had sat down at the kitchen table and talked for 4 hours, calmly and methodically, about why leaving was a terrible idea, about what it would do to the girls, about how much he loved her, about how things would be different. She had stayed. Things had not been different. When Rosie was 7 and Nadia was 9, He had spoken to Nadia the way he spoke to Lena, correcting her, diminishing something she had made at school, watching the girl's face fall in the particular way that only a parent sees. Lena had been in the kitchen doorway, and she had seen Nadia's face, and something in her had simply decided. She had spent the next 3 months preparing, putting small amounts of cash away every week, making copies of important documents, learning, quietly, what she would need. She had told no one, not her sister, not her oldest friend. She had learned by then that telling people gave him time to counter. She had put the girls in the truck on a Monday morning in July and driven west and kept driving. Dale listened to all of it, the 2 evenings, the quiet telling of it. He did not say you should have done it sooner, because he understood that was not how it worked. He did not say why didn't you just, because he was old enough to know that those 2 words together almost always revealed the speaker's ignorance. He just listened. On the second evening, when she was done, there was a long quiet between them. Then Dale said, "You got your girls out. Whatever else anyone says about the way you did it, you got your daughters out. That's the thing that counts." Lena looked at the porch floor. Then she said, "I used to feel guilty about not leaving sooner, about staying as long as I did, like it was something wrong with me." "It wasn't wrong with you," Dale said. "He was very careful to make sure you stayed. That's not your failing. That's his." She looked at him. He meant it. She could tell. There was nothing performative about it. He was just saying a true thing. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. Nadia told Dale something else a week later, privately, out by the paddock. She said, "There's something my mom didn't tell you." Dale looked at her. He waited. "She came back for us once," Nadia said. "She left, and then she came back, because she was afraid of what would happen if she just disappeared with us. She wanted to do it the legal way, and he convinced her again. So she left a second time, the real time. She was quiet for a moment. She came back because of us, even when it was harder." Dale was quiet too. "I just thought you should know that," Nadia said. "Thank you for telling me," Dale said. Nadia looked at Copper grazing below the fence. "She thinks you might think less of her, for staying as long as she did." "I don't," Dale said. "I know," Nadia said, "but she doesn't know that yet. She's still learning. 10 years old." Dale thought, someday this girl is going to be the kind of woman who changes something in the world. He felt that in his bones. The legal proceedings were slow and occasionally difficult. Victor had a capable lawyer, and he pressed every angle available to him. And there were moments when Lena came in from a phone call with her face pale and her hands too steady. Dale did not try to promise her outcomes. He was not that kind of person. He just made sure the coffee was hot and the porch light was on, and that she knew he was not going anywhere. There were hard evenings, not between Dale and Lena, but in Lena herself, the kind of hard that comes from being in the middle of something you cannot control the speed of. The law moved when it moved. Documents were filed, dates were set and then rescheduled. Her lawyer, a steady woman named Rita, who had handled these kinds of cases for 20 years, had told Lena at the beginning that the hardest part was not the outcome, which she believed would be fine, but the waiting. The waiting was the part that wore people down. She had been right. There were nights when Lena sat very still at the kitchen table, after the girls were in bed with a cup of tea she was not really drinking, looking at nothing in particular. Dale had learned to leave her with those nights. Not to fix them, not to talk her out of them, just to be nearby. He would sit at the other end of the table with his own coffee and something to read, and the simple fact of another person present in the room was sometimes enough. She told him once, late on one of those evenings, that she had never had anyone just sit with her before. Not sit in the useful way, the present but not demanding way. The men in her life before, including Victor, had been made uncomfortable by her hard moods and had either tried to talk her out of them or left the room. Dale did neither. He just stayed. "You are a very unusual person," she said. "Just old," he said. "When you get old enough, you stop being afraid of feelings that aren't yours." She looked at him. "That's not what most people learn when they get older." "I learned it from Carol Ann," he said. "She was better at most things than I was." Lena looked down at her tea. She sounds like she was something. She was, Dale said, and left it there, which was the right place to leave it. Pastor Roy came out one afternoon. He said he was just passing by, which everyone understood was not entirely true, but Roy had always had excellent manners about that sort of thing. He sat with Lena on the porch while Dale was out with the horses, and their conversation was long and quiet, and Dale never asked what was said. When he came back in, he found Roy eating a piece of pie Lena had made, and the two of them talking like they had known each other a long time. Roy stayed for supper. Rosie interrogated him about whether he had any animals, and whether his house was big enough to have a goat. Roy said he had thought about a goat once. Rosie said she would think about it with him. After supper, Roy walked with Dale out to the truck. "You prayed for something," Roy said. He said it without preamble, which was his way. "I did," Dale said, "and then you answered the door." "It wasn't a door, it was a broken-down truck on a county road." Roy smiled at the ground. "Same thing. You stopped. You didn't have to." Dale looked out at the pasture. The evening was doing its thing again, the colors moving through the sky in their unhurried way. "I wasn't sure I was the right man for this," Dale said. "Nobody ever is," Roy said. "That's not the question God asks. The question is whether you're willing to try anyway." Dale thought about that for a moment. The willing part. He turned it over. "Yeah," he said, "I am." Roy nodded once, the way he nodded when something settled. He got in his truck and drove away. Thanksgiving came. Patsy drove out from San Marcos with her husband Don and their two grown kids, which had been the plan before any of this happened, and she arrived with both arms full of food and her eyes open to everything. She was polite to Lena, carefully polite, the kind that means I have not yet decided what I think. But then Rosie happened. Rosie, who had never met Patsy before in her life and did not care, attached herself to Dale's sister within 15 minutes of her arrival and began telling her, in great detail, about the names of the cattle and the personality differences between Copper and the other horses, and how Dale had promised she could help with the branding in spring, which he had not actually promised, but had not disputed either. Rosie held Patsy's hand while she talked and led her around the yard, showing her things with the absolute confidence of a child who has decided that all adults are potential friends until proven otherwise. By lunchtime, Patsy's careful politeness had gone. She was just herself. At the table, Lena said grace. It was not a church grace, not a memorized thing. It was personal and unhurried, and it included, without self-consciousness, being grateful for the people at the table and for the specific fact of a roof and a warm kitchen and enough. It was the grace of someone who understood what enough meant. Patsy had her eyes open a crack during it, which was a habit she had that she was not aware of. She was watching Lena, and then she was watching her brother's face while Lena prayed. Dale had the expression of a man who had not expected to find himself grateful again and was finding that he was. After dinner, when the dishes were done and the kids were scattered and Don had fallen asleep in the living room chair, Patsy found her brother on the porch. She stood next to him at the railing for a while without saying anything. The sky was cold and clear, bright with stars the way it only got in winter. Then she said, not looking at him, "She's good, Dale." Dale said nothing. "And those girls," Patsy said. She shook her head slightly. "That older one is going to be something." "I know," Dale said. Patsy turned and looked at her brother. She had known him his whole life. She knew what his face looked like when he was just existing, getting through it. She knew what it had looked like for 3 years, and she knew what it looked like right now, which was different. She hugged him. Long, like she had at every visit since Carol Ann died, but different this time. Less like holding something together, more like celebrating something. Carol Ann would have liked her, Patsy said into his shoulder. Dale breathed in slowly. "Yeah," he said. "She would have." December came. The ranch had a different quality in winter, quieter and grayer, but also more still, like it was resting. The girls had been enrolled in the local school by this point. Rosie had 3 best friends within the first week. Nadia had taken longer, as Nadia did with everything, but she had found one girl in her class who was serious and bookish, and they had bonded over a science project, and now came home talking about things no adults were supposed to understand. Lena had started working part-time at the small medical clinic in town, helping with administrative work. She was a nurse by training, and there was talk of her eventually coming back in that capacity once the right certifications were in place. She came home from work with more color in her face and something that was close to ease. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Victor's lawyer tried several things. None of them worked the way he had hoped, partly because the documentation Lena had gathered was careful and thorough, and partly because Nadia, asked by a family services evaluator what her life had been like, answered with the calm clarity of a child who has decided the truth is not going to hurt her anymore. Victor did not come back to the ranch. He had been made to understand, through the right official channels, that there were parameters around that. On a December evening, cold and still, with the stars out, Dale and Lena were on the porch with blankets and coffee. The girls were inside. Rosie was drawing, Nadia was reading. The house made the sounds of a house with people in it. Lena said she had been approved for a small rental in town. She had been looking into it quietly. She thought she and the girls should have their own space while everything was still being finalized. She said it was the right thing. Dale listened. He looked at the pasture. He reached into his shirt pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the porch railing between them. "What is this?" Lena asked. "Something I wrote a few weeks ago. I've been carrying it around, trying to decide whether to give it to you." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked it up and unfolded it. It read, in Dale's plain, slow handwriting, "I am not asking you to stay because I need someone here. I am asking you to stay because this place makes a different kind of sense with you in it. And I think you might know what I mean by that." Lena read it. She read it again. She folded it back up and held it in both hands. She did not say anything for a long time. The cold air was quiet around them. Then, "I'm not easy to love, Dale. I'm not looking for easy," he said. "I've done easy. Easy leaves you alone on a porch." She almost laughed at that. "Not quite, but close. You don't know everything about me yet. I know enough," he said. "And I'm patient." She looked at him for a long moment in the cold dark. "You're a very strange man," she said. "I've been told." She put the note in her own pocket. She did not call about the rental the next day, or the day after. "So," he asked her in the barn. This was, if you knew Dale at all, exactly where you would have expected it to happen. Not at a restaurant, not on a planned evening with candles. In the barn on a Saturday afternoon in late January, both of them mucking out stalls, wearing old coats and work boots, with the particular smell of horses and hay around them, and the winter light coming gray through the high window. He had been carrying the ring in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks. It had been his grandmother's, a simple thing, not showy, a small stone set in plain silver. Carol Ann had offered to wear it once, early in their marriage, when she knew the story of it, and he had loved her for asking. She had her own ring that she had loved. He had kept his grandmother's in a box in the dresser drawer since. He took it out of his pocket without planning to, without rehearsing anything. They were both just standing there in the middle of the work, and he looked over at Lena, and she had straw in her hair from where she had leaned close to the wall, and she was not looking at him, she was looking at the horse, and he just said it. "I want to ask you to marry me. I don't want to push you if you're not ready, but I want to ask." She turned and looked at him. He held out the ring, small and silver and old. She looked at the ring, then at him, then at the ring again. "Yes," she said, before he could say anything else. Clear and plain and sure. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She looked at it for a moment on her hand. Then she looked up at him, and there was something in her face that he recognized without quite having words for it. The look of someone who has walked a very long way through very hard country and has finally come around a bend in the road and seen something good. "You still have straw in your hair," he said. She laughed. A real one, full and unguarded, the kind he had not heard from her yet and would never get tired of hearing. Nadia was the first person Lena told. She went to find her daughter, who was out at the paddock with Copper, and she crouched down beside her and showed her the ring and said, simply, "Dale asked me to marry him." Nadia looked at the ring, then at her mother's face. "Are you happy?" Nadia asked. "Yes," Lena said. Nadia nodded slowly. Good, she said. Then, can Copper be in the wedding? That is a Rosie question. Rosie's going to ask for all of them. I know. Nadia almost smiled. Then she did smile, a real one, which was still rare enough from her that Lena held it in her memory like a photograph. Rosie was told 5 minutes later, and immediately began planning a wedding that involved horses, a rainbow, and a cake shaped like a cow, none of which were necessarily going to happen, but none of which Dale was in any hurry to talk her out of either. So, the divorce was finalized in February. It was not painless, but it was done. The paperwork that arrived in the mail was 2 pages long and mostly legal language, and Lena held it for a moment before she set it on the kitchen table, and Dale put his hand over hers briefly, just briefly, and then took it away. Victor did not respond with anything dramatic. He had gotten what he had spent years trying to keep, which was the appearance of being reasonable. He could not easily be unreasonable now without losing that. So he was quiet. His lawyer sent a single follow-up letter that went to Lena's own lawyer and came back answered, and then it was done. Done was a word Lena held for several days before she let herself believe it. She had spent so long in a situation where done never meant done, where quiet only meant waiting, that the actual finality of it took time to settle into her bones. Dale did not rush her through it. He understood, in the way he understood most things, that some arrivals take longer than others. The girls processed it differently. Rosie asked a few practical questions, got practical answers, and went back to her list of cattle names within 10 minutes, which was exactly what Rosie did with everything that was not immediately in front of her. Nadia sat with it longer. She was quiet for 2 or 3 days in the particular Nadia way, thinking underneath the surface of ordinary conversation, and then one morning at breakfast she said, without looking up from her toast, "We don't have to leave now, right?" "No," Lena said. "We don't have to leave." Nadia nodded and went back to her toast, but her shoulders had dropped slightly in a way that said she had been carrying that question for a while and was glad to set it down. Life settled into itself the way life does when the hard part is over and the good part is allowed to begin. Rosie finished naming the cattle. The complete list was 64 names long and included Biscuit, Cloud, Sir Wiggles, Princess Meatball, Tornado, Grandpa, and several others that were harder to explain. Dale kept the list tucked in the kitchen drawer where he kept other important things. Nadia, at the end of the school year, won a county competition for a science project about soil erosion and water conservation, a subject she had become interested in because of the ranch. She stood at the front of a small auditorium and presented her findings to adults and other students with the calm, precise confidence of someone who had learned that what she knew was worth saying. Dale sat in the 3rd row and clapped until his hands hurt. He was not the only one with wet eyes, but he was definitely not going to admit to it. The wedding was small. It was held on the ranch on a warm Saturday in April, which meant it was outdoors, which meant Rosie was able to insist that Copper be present, which he was, standing quietly at the fence of the paddock in view of everything, wearing a small ribbon that Rosie had tied around his neck. He did not appear to mind. Pastor Roy officiated. Patsy stood next to Lena with her eyes already going before it had even started. Tom from the neighboring ranch was there with his family. The girls from Nadia's school sat together in a row and whispered to each other and tried to look like they were not whispering. Rosie refused to be assigned any single role in the ceremony and instead performed a hybrid function of flower girl, ring bearer, and personal usher that she had invented herself. When it was done, and Roy said the thing that made it official, and Dale kissed his wife, Rosie shouted yes, from somewhere to the left, with a volume that startled the horses. Everyone laughed. Copper tossed his head at the fence. The April sky was enormous and very blue. That evening, after the guests had gone and the girls were finally asleep, Dale and Lena sat on the porch in the old rocking chairs. It was warm enough not to need a blanket. The stars were thick and still, and the pasture was quiet and dark below them. Dale thought about a prayer on a porch not so far from this one, on a night not so different from this one, about a year ago. A plain, honest prayer said out loud to no one but God and the dark. He thought about the 4 days that followed it. A broken-down truck on a county road, a woman with her arms crossed reading a situation, A little girl with her nose pressed to the glass asking if he had real cows. He had not prayed for a specific thing. He had not described what he needed or put conditions on it. He had just said, "I am tired and I am open, and if something good is out there, I would like to be able to see it." He had not known what that would look like. He looked at Lena beside him, her coffee cup resting on her knee, her face turned toward the stars the way she did when she was just being still. She had come a very long distance to be sitting in that chair. She had survived things he had not had to, and she had done it quietly, and she had brought her daughters through it, and they were all right here, safe and whole on the other side of it. Out in the yard the night air moved, just slightly, and from inside the house came the small settled sounds of sleeping children. Dale looked at the pasture. The sky was doing its thing, even now, even at this hour, more stars than you could count over land that went on as far as you could see. He had prayed for a second chance. What he had gotten was bigger than that. It was messier, and more complicated, and more real than anything he could have prayed for by name. It was a woman who had learned to be strong in ways that cost her something. It was a 10-year-old who saw through things most adults couldn't. It was a 7-year-old who had made him laugh harder than he had in years and reminded him that joy did not require a reason. It was a full house, a porch that had people in it, coffee cups on both hooks in the morning. Lena shifted beside him and put her head briefly on his shoulder, just for a moment, then lifted it again and went back to watching the stars. She did not say anything. He did not either. That was enough. That was more than enough. Some prayers don't come back the way you sent them out. They come back better. Harder to carry, yes, and more complicated than you imagined, and full of things you did not know you needed until they were already there. But better, always better. This story is a work of fiction written in the style of a true life narrative.